Well, after a long holiday break, Michigan legislators are back at work and facing a busy agenda in the new year. Both the House and the Senate were back in session last week, and Governor Snyder will be presenting his annual State of the State message this coming Tuesday night. This morning, we'll take a look back at some of the legislation that passed last year and look ahead to see what will be some of the priorities in the coming session as we talk with State Representative Ed McBroom. It all starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Now, here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, State Representative Ed McBroom was first elected to the Michigan House in November of 2010 and is currently serving his third term. He represents the 108th District, which includes Delta, Dickinson, and Menominee counties. Representative McBroom serves as chair of the Committee on Oversight and Ethics. He's also a member of the Committees on Education, Energy Policy, and Natural Resources. Pleased he could join us for a conversation this morning. Welcome to the Ryan Report.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Good to have you with us. This is the first time you and I have had a chance to sit down and talk like this.
Yeah, we've only met in passing a few times beforehand, and
Right.
once before I was in office, and you didn't even know who I was then.
That's probably true. You know, we keep hearing you're a dairy farmer. You're a lifelong dairy farmer. Are you still a dairy farmer?
Yeah, I was just out at 2 in the morning checking on a couple of cows and on some springing heifers I've got, and was wiring up drinking fountains and got stuff all over my hands, and it's a busy life. And so when I'm not in Lansing, especially in the mornings, I still do a lot of farming. Most of the constituents don't want to see me at 2 and 3 in the morning, so
Okay.
the cows don't seem to mind though.
And somebody takes care of the cows when you're gone?
I farm with my brother and
Okay.
my parents and my wife, and yeah, I'm very blessed. They are very supportive of what I'm doing in the legislature, and so they allow me to be gone and make sure things keep on running when I'm not there.
You also went to Northern. You graduated with some teaching degrees.
Yeah.
Was teaching part of your career plan at some point?
Yeah, it was. I wanted to find a way to continue farming. I think it's a great life, and especially a wonderful place to raise a family. And so I looked at the possibilities of careers that could involve still farming, and
Okay.
teaching had some of that flexibility, and I love the classroom, and I majored in both music and in social studies, two areas I really enjoy. And when I got out of college and was looking for that full-time teaching spot, did a lot of substitute teaching,
Okay.
and was waiting for that full-time spot to come about before I got involved with politics and kind of got sucked into that
And
world.
so what caused that to happen?
Well, I got really involved with Michigan Farm Bureau's State Young Farmer Program. I
Okay.
represented young farmers across the Upper Peninsula for 4 years. Got me really plugged into public policy making, issue advocacy, and really connected me with some things in Lansing, and happened to be speaking at a Farm Bureau event when Tom Casperson, who was the former rep at the time, he heard me speaking and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about running for office?" And I said, "Well, I actually have been, but I'm too young, I don't know anybody, I don't have any money, so
Right.
maybe someday when I'm older." He's like, "Oh no, you could do this, you could if you really want to." And so my wife and I talked about it, prayed about it for a couple of months, and threw our hat in the ring in January of 2010, and here we are.
And since we're talking about career, and you're in the final year of your service in the House because of term limits, are you considering any further options in the future?
Yeah, there's a number of options. I can simply go back to farming. I've looked into going back to teaching. I've looked at running for the Senate seat when Senator Casperson is done. Right now, I'm making my plans to make an attempt for the Senate seat when Senator Casperson is done. It's been a real privilege to serve. I enjoy it. I think that I have something to offer, and have been really privileged, especially to be part of such a great team of legislators in the Upper Peninsula. And I really think term limits are a big problem, and they haven't been good for the UP, and it unfortunately kind of breaks up the good team we've gotten. And it's after a few years, when you just are really starting to figure out
Right.
where everything is and what strings to pull and which ones don't do anything, you're out. And I've got some things I'd like to finish doing that I know I'm not going to be able to finish in this last year. So a run for the Senate is logical to to try and attempt to finish the work that I've started.
On that subject of term limits, there seems to be a lot of agreement that maybe Michigan's term limits are too strict at best.
We have the shortest ones in the whole nation, and I think that's their big problem. They've not done a service to Michigan. You see, even before we had term limits, there were exceptions, such as Mr. Jacobetti and others from around here, but for the most part, the average service in the Michigan House of Representatives was between 10 and 12 years.
Okay.
That's an amount that's really reasonable. You get some experience, you get some opportunity to serve, and you go back home again. But now we just, we are going to see over 60 people of 110 leave the House at the end of this coming year. And the most experience that anybody will have who is still there will be 4 years.
Right.
And that's really very poor for the institution, and it really shows. I watch the institution just really struggle to be able to follow its own rules, to stay true to procedures, to understand its heritage and traditions, and to really have established leadership is really very challenging in the era of such short term limits.
Yeah. Typically, if someone gets to serve a term and then they become Speaker of the House, so that it kind of underscores what you're saying.
Right, and it really has consolidated power into the leadership positions. As inexperienced as they may be, it's consolidated that power. It's consolidated the power in the bureaucracy and in the governor's office, and really left the people's house kind of inexperienced and unable to be the body that it needs to be and could be.
And quickly on the state Senate term, it kind of depends on what happens with Senator Casperson. His term won't be up for 2 years after.
That's right.
After you finish your term, unless he is successful in his run for the run for Congress, which would change everything.
So that leaves a lot of my decision making still kind of in hiatus. So.
Okay, very good. I've got a lot more questions, especially about legislation. We'll get back to those in a minute. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. Our guest this morning is State Representative Ed McBroom from the 108th District. One more political question before we move on. The Republicans currently hold a majority in the House of 61 to 47, 2 vacant seats, and those vacancies occurred in Republican seats. And you were involved in that with 2 representatives who really were having an affair, to put it quickly.
Yeah.
Are you satisfied with the way that was resolved? And you were the chair of that committee.
Yeah, well, the 2 of them, I mean, it went beyond just the fact that they had an affair. I mean, it was the misuse of their offices. It was the abuse of trust, trying to deceive the public in a grandiose way that they did. The insistence that they hadn't done anything wrong, and just a lot of subterfuge and very strange, odd behavior just showed that they were not qualified to hold those offices, and we're going to continue to be detracting from the House's ability to do its business. So I believe that the final solution was the right solution, that they be removed from office, and that their constituents have a chance to elect somebody else.
And they did elect, or they will elect somebody
right,
else.
That'll be completed here in March.
Okay. And actually one was expelled and one
Resigned at the last second, right.
Let's talk about some issues. Road funding finally passed last year. Were you happy with the results of that?
Well, yes and no. It was obvious to me that we needed to invest more in our roads in our state. I think that's obvious to everyone, that we're falling way behind what our neighboring states are doing. We had a problem that hadn't been addressed in over 20 years, really, and we had 2 previous governors who just borrowed a lot of money to kind of put the problem aside for a while. Both Engler and Granholm did that. And so it was clear to me something needed to change. The solution that we came up with, it's a mixed bag. It increases the amount of money that's being contributed to roads from all of us. And I think it failed to address the problem that I think is most substantial, and that's the fact that we're charging sales tax on gasoline, and none of that money in the sales tax goes towards the roads. It goes to other places.
Right.
And so because we have sales tax on gasoline, we pay more tax at the pump than just about any other state, and yet put the least of almost any other state towards roads themselves. I wanted to fix that problem. That problem, though, required a constitutional solution. It required going to the voters, and in order to get that, you need a 2/3 vote within the House of Representatives and the Senate. And when you need 2/3 supermajorities, things start to happen.
Right.
Deals start to be made with the minority party because they finally have a lever of control that they don't generally have. And what did we see come from all that? Well, Proposal 1. And the voters soundly defeated that last May.
Right.
And so it was back to the drawing board to find a solution that could be made that, in my mind, did not ultimately fix the real linchpin of the problem for our road funding. So the solution we have does get the road funding we need. It just doesn't necessarily make a simpler, fairer, more efficient tax system to get there. And it uses current revenues in a good way. I think that's important, that we're prioritizing our spending. The House had proposed numerous plans where we would actually say, not only are we prioritizing our future spending, but here's what we're deprioritizing. So here's how we're going to shift the scales. The final plan left that in limbo. That wasn't supported through the Senate to do it that way. They would rather say, okay, we're going to reprioritize the dollars, but we're going to wait and see for a couple of years to figure out just who's going to get less priority to make that happen. So I'm glad that we've got a solution. I'm glad we're finally going to be actually doing something with roads. I think when you talk to your local road agencies, they're really very happy and pleased to see that they're finally going to be able to do some substantial work on our local roads that have been left aside for so long. It's obviously going to make a big difference and make our roads safer and better, but it's also leaving some other things up in the air. And that's part of why, I mean, with the shortness of term limits are one of the big reasons, I believe, again, that the House and the Senate struggled so much to come up with a solution. Everything becomes so political when your tenure is so short, and when you have so many people with so little experience. We had members constantly in this year's current freshman class, as we call them, over 40 new members who said, well, why can't we do it this way or this way or this way? And it's like, well, all of us said that when we were first in too, and we found out, well, you can't do it this way, but they're like, well, we don't know if we can trust you, so we have to go figure it out ourselves. And you just have this vicious cycle. And I'm glad we finally got something done, but it could have been better. It also could have been a lot worse.
Okay. We've got a number of issues.
I would say just one last thing. I mean, I was really pleased that we got some property tax relief out of it. I think that was really critical for me. It's going to be a substantial property tax relief for folks all across the UP by increasing the homestead property tax credit and increasing the threshold of those who are eligible for it. That's real relief of a real regressive tax. And I think that was something that really finally got my support in the end.
Okay. We want to talk about some issues coming up. We'll do that after we take this break. Back with more on the Ryan Report in just 2 minutes. Our guest this morning is State Representative Ed McBroom. A lot of issues coming up. Probably not time to talk about all of them, but certainly energy is high on the agenda for the House. What are we going to? We see these ads on TV about supporting the Knopf-Nesbitt plan. There is no Knopf-Nesbitt plan, is there?
Well, there are. There's bills by both of them.
Right.
Those ads aren't exactly all squeaky clean when it comes to who's funding them and where that's coming from. Obviously, they're being paid for by a couple of the very large utilities downstate who have their own interests. And
but there are some differences in the House and Senate, aren't there?
Well, I think for the most part they run pretty parallel to each other in their initial unamended forms. Okay. But clearly to myself and Representative Keevela, who's on the committee with me, and Rep. Deanda too, I think the most important thing is to get the solution for the Upper Peninsula solidified. And so there's a lot of downstate bickering over this and that and the other thing, but for those of us from the UP, it's how do we make sure that within this plan, this huge overhaul of Michigan's energy, we make sure that the UP does not find itself in another situation like we had a couple years ago, where it looked like We were going to be paying hundreds of millions of dollars for the closure of Presque Isle, all on our own backs and not with any sort of other regional assistance. So that's what's been the priority for us. That's why I'm on the Energy Committee this term, is to make sure that solution is within there.
Okay. One of the other items that wasn't taken care of last year was the so-called dark store legislation.
Yeah.
Are we going to see some progress on that?
We're actually making some really great progress. I'm more optimistic about a solution on that issue than it ever has been before. Rep. Kivala and I have been attending numerous tax policy meetings. They've been going very well. The chairman has really come a long way from absolutely no, not going to touch this, to, hey, there's obviously a problem here. Can we find a workable solution? He's appointed a work group. They're making a lot of progress. We've had a lot of great input from locals here in Marquette County, Dickinson County, Delta County, and other places in the UP. I think we're really on our way to finding a solution for it. Unfortunately, some of the bells can't be unrung, but I think we can stop the bleeding and really fix some of our policy for the future.
We can't change what has happened, but
unfortunately,
we can
no,
change
that's
the
constitutionally locked in. But
another major issue is auto insurance, and I think, you know, there are a lot of people who would be happy if auto insurance rates went down.
Yeah.
But there are also people who are concerned that because the current system does ensure that people who are seriously injured will be taken care of, and not wind up being bankrupt in the process.
Right.
Can we keep all of that so it
well,
works
I think
for
that
people?
we can. I mean, we've offered numerous solutions in my 5 years already that still leave Michigan the enormously front runner in the pack of support for auto accident victims. But right now you have a system that's really uncapped, unrestricted. It allows for a tremendous amount of abuses and fraud, and you know, really is hurting all of us. We're paying through the nose for a gold-plated Cadillac plan that no other state even comes close to. We have unlimited benefits. The next closest state is New York. They're at $50,000 capped benefits. So we've offered plans to do $500,000, that was thrown out. We offered to do $1 million, that was thrown out. We've offered to do $10 million, which there has never been a case yet in Michigan history where we've actually paid that level of benefits. And still, those who are opposed to the plan won't support it. We talk about making sure that hospitals can't charge 1,000% more for a procedure when you come in from an auto accident versus, you know, slipping in your bathtub, and yet that gets thrown out. We have a real disparity in how this whole system is put together, and it's costing us a boatload of money, and we've got to be able to do better. We've got to be able to save people money. It's hindering individuals, and in my mind, it's become a real tax on the poor, because people have to pay this expensive insurance even when they have a car that's not worth that much. And then something happens, somebody else pulls out in front of them, their car gets wrecked. What do they get for it? They get nothing. They get no help from their insurance then to cover that car because they didn't even have collision or anything else on it. And we have a huge problem in Michigan. And it's even worse in Detroit, believe it or not. You know, the average costs around here are about $2,000. In Detroit, it's over $4,000. So
we have to bring this conversation to a close.
All right.
You know, there are so many issues, and they're all so complex. I really appreciate your coming in and talking to us, and I'm sure we can
be happy to do it
I'm
again.
sure we can do it again in the future. Thanks very much for being here. Back with more on the Ryan Report after one more break. A television show called American Idol first hit the airwaves on June 11, 2002. It went on to become one of the most successful shows in American history. For many of its first 14 years, it was the most popular show on television, period. But in recent years, its ratings started to slip a little. It still attracts a very large audience, but not what it was in its first decade. And so at the end of last season, the Fox network announced that this season would be its last. That season started a week or two ago, and you can see it on our sister station, Fox UP. I didn't watch the show for the first 6 seasons. It just didn't fit into my viewing plans. And despite the tremendous hype it received, I just never took the time to check it out. But I started watching season 7, and I've been hooked ever since. It's a show about music, including some pretty talented singers, but it's really a show about people who have a dream. Sometimes those dreams are shattered, but for some they come true. and it's fun to watch. Why has the show lost some of its popularity? Probably no single reason for that. Television entertainment shows tend to have a limited life. If a show gets 9 or 10 seasons, it's considered exceptional, and American Idol will have 15 when it rings down the final curtain. But perhaps there's more to it than that. American audiences change, older people move out, younger people move in, and some of their ideas about what makes good television also changes. Sometimes people become more cynical about shows with happy endings. American Idol is a basic show the whole family could watch. While it stayed pretty much the same, new shows came along that had a different approach. More glitter, more glamour, more star power. And there are those who say that American Idol by today's standards is kind of old style and corny. Well, maybe my age is showing, but the fact is, corny isn't bad. There's something very American about being corny. Heartfelt stories about people trying to find that big break that will make things better for them isn't a bad thing. A young mom trying to make a life for her kids, a dad who sets aside his dream of entertaining to take an ordinary job to support his family, a 16-year-old with a big talent who makes it to the big stage. The number of stories are endless. Yeah, it's corny, maybe even a little hokey, but it's called the American dream, and it's what helped to make this country a very special place, as a lot of ordinary people set out to do extraordinary things. American Idol fans will survive the loss of a favorite television show, but it's important that America not lose that spirit that says people with heart and a dream can still find success here. It's always been part of our DNA, and if we lost that, we would truly be losing something that has made this country unique. What I do know is that when the end of this final season comes around, I'm going to miss it. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Well, thank you for joining us this morning, and special thanks also to State Representative Ed McBroom for being here to talk about what we can expect as a new year gets underway in the state capitol. A lot of big issues to be decided in the coming months. Many of them will affect you, and so I will do my best to keep you updated. Looks like winter has finally settled in here, so get out and hit the ski trails or curl up with a good book, whatever works best for you. In any case, enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope we'll see you again next Sunday morning.